anniversary. The birth of the Northville Women's Club, while noteworthy to the ladies involved in the literary studies, did not make much of a dent in the local news in Northville. According to Jack Hoffman in his book, Northville, The First 100 Years, the ladies kept their organization concealed under their bonnets because nothing of it was published in the local newspaper. During the club's first 100 years, 55 women have served as president. Names like Benton, Northrop, Dubar, Knapp, Starkweather, Lapham, Friedel, Babbitt, Atchison, and Whipple shaped Northville, as well as the Northville Women's Club. Our founding ladies did not have the conveniences that we enjoy. Some women needed to take the town trolley to get to the early meetings. Some as far away as Ponsford Pond, familiar today as the corner of Beck and 6 Mile Road. The traditions of Northville Women's Club were handed down from generation to generation, and each looked forward to yearly events with their daughters. In 1892, direct telephone lines first connected New York and Chicago. Northville boasted an interurban trolley, and for a nickel you could ride to Detroit. From Detroit, one could reach Farmington, Ann Arbor, Wayne, and Belleville, and return home, all in a day's time. Ponsford's, the local men's emporium, was located on Main Street, where Lapham's men's store is today. The original owner was the grandfather of current owner Charles Lapham. Out-of-town visitors would have stayed at the Exchange Hotel on the corner of Main and Hutton. In the evening, gathering around the piano, songs like After the Ball and the rowdier, the Bowery, would have entertained the guests. The choice mode of transportation for the day was horse and carriage. Early meetings were held in members' homes. The original membership was 42, but it increased in size by the time of the election of the first president, Lucy Stout Dowd. Northville residents could ride into town to get their provisions, leaving their horse and buggy at Hirsch's for shoeing and carriage painting. It was a time to catch up on the world affairs as well as local gossip. There might be news of President Benjamin Harrison, or perhaps stories from the Wild West, like the arrest of the Dalton gang at Coffeesville, Kansas. At Wheeler's Grocer and Post Office, not only could you pick up your mail, but you could get eggs for 22 cents a dozen, a gallon of milk for 26 cents, and bread for 5 cents a loaf. As early as the 1890s, Northville was known for its clear spring water. The fish hatchery site on 7 Mile was chosen because of the interlocking springs that fed the pond. One of these homes on Dunlap Street might have brought a price of $2,000. Little did these children know that the neighborhood where they played would become the site of some of the most expensive property in the state of Michigan. Down these dirt streets, one might see Henry Ford stirring up dust and public opinion with the first horseless carriage. In the year the club was founded, a community group produced the brochure, Northville, the Ideal Suburban Village. It was an effort to get new residents and businesses to locate in Northville. The publication makes a number of interesting claims, such as fresh air and pure water are recognized by the medical fraternity at large as the two most important factors in the health of every community. In addition to scenic description, the brochure names local businesses. Some of them were Glow Manufacturing, Hanrahan Refrigerator, Dubar Manufacturing, Tonquish Manufacturing, Clover Condensed Milk, and Northville Mills. In 1902, school children would have heeded the advertisement for the beginning of school by whistling Yankee Doodle as they carried their lunches in tin pans to elementary school. It was at this time that the Women's Club first ventured away from its home community. This was just such an occasion when the Northville Women's Club traveled to a conference being held in Wayne. This picture of founder Narcia Dubar shows that motherhood was as important as world affairs. The landscape of our country as well as our village was changing. The days of horse and carriage were quickly making way for the automobile, and Northville wouldn't be left behind. One might have shopped at Schrader's to furnish their new $2,200 home. This might have seemed pricey on a $472 a year salary, but for 50 cents you could get both a dozen eggs and a gallon of milk, so there was still enough left over for some of the finer things in life. This might include an automobile. Northville readied itself by making sure curb heights on Main and Center Street were the same level as the running boards of the new driving machines. Two of Northville's larger employers were East Lawn Tuberculosis Sanitarium, located at the top of Buckner Hill, near today's Northville High School, and Dubar Manufacturing, located on the corner of Katy and Griswold. As the decade drew to a close, we find Northville celebrating. Do you think it's the beginning of Victorian Festival? The year is 1912, and some Northville residents were off to work at the new Ford plant. The automotive industry was already playing a big part in shaping the future of Northville. While their men were at work, Sam Brader would have catered to the women's shopping needs as they outfitted their families. After Brader's heading down the street to the grocer, you would have spent more of that $900 a year income on a dozen eggs for 48 cents, milk at 44 cents a gallon, and bread that had doubled in price to 9 cents a loaf. After a long week's work at Dubar's, your husband might have surprised you with tickets to the Opera House, where you would have heard the popular songs of the decade, For Me and My Gal, Oh Johnny, and Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. A new 3-bedroom home cost $3,200. This is the Ambler home on the corner of First and Katy. With today's skyrocketing taxes, one might find it interesting that during this decade, the yearly school budget was little more than $50,000. Obviously, school news has always been important to the Northville community. Northville, known as the Little Switzerland of Michigan, was used as an excellent testing ground for new cars. If you could make it up Buckner Hill on a road running parallel to North Center in third gear, you had a car with a very powerful engine. The first 25 years of the Northville Woman's Club were years of establishment and growth. The club began with only 2 officers, but by the 25th anniversary, a system similar to the one used today had been established. Meetings began to be held in the old library building donated to the community by second president Dr. Mary Lapham. During the 1920s, after hearing the Northville City Band play such toe tappers as I Got Rhythm and Sunny Side of the Street, you might have driven down Center Street to have the attendant fill your tank with 20-cent a gallon Indian high-test gasoline. That new $4,500 home you just purchased probably would have been heated with coal provided by C.R. Ely & Sons. Some of the newsworthy events during this decade were the discovery of the planet Pluto, Greta Garbo starring in her first talkie, and who can forget Black Monday, the day the stock market crashed. During these trying times, Women's Club members still found time to help their community, whether it be establishing a baby clinic to help those too poor to go to Sessions Hospital, or volunteering at East Lawn with the Wayne County Tuberculosis Society. Our members were there. The federally supported fish hatchery in Northville continued to supply jobs in our community. It was at this time that some of our members might have given up their traditional role in the nuclear family and worked to help shoulder some of the financial responsibilities. Current residents of Northville may not realize just how much we owe to Henry Ford and his family. In this picture, we see Henry and Edsel Ford standing in front of the construction site for the new Ford valve plant. The transportation industry was once again making its presence known in Northville. Eddie Stinson chose Northville as the site for his manufacturing plant. Aircraft were assembled at the factory without any wings, pulled down the streets of Northville and out to Ponsford Field at the corner of Beck and 6 Mile. Then the wings were attached and a new plane taken for its maiden voyage. Eddie Stinson was a bit of a daredevil and was somewhat famous for his aerial acrobatics. Often he would do a series of loop-de-loops to alert Northville residents that he was returning home. As the Women's Club moved into its second 25 years, it developed a sense of mission and community involvement. The group established regular programs for the community schools and teachers. The club became a member of the Detroit Federation of Women's Clubs and was an active participant. Regular trips out of town were scheduled to places like the Detroit Institute of Arts and Cranbrook. Guest days were traded with other area women's clubs like Farmington and Plymouth. The group made a regular commitment to the support of Northville's library. The community, which had continued to grow during the first 25 years, began to stagnate. The industries existent at the turn of the century were all but gone. The last of them closed during these years. The Interurban, which at first sped members to other locations, stopped operating before 1930, partly as a result of the wide use of automobiles. 1940, and the world was once again at war. On December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor was attacked, and America was off to war. Many of Northville war casualties were bid farewell at Casterline's funeral home. During this time, meetings took place on Friday afternoons in the ladies' library. After the meeting, members might have returned to their homes to listen to favorite radio serials or to listen to popular songs like The Anniversary Waltz or Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered. While tooling around town on your bicycle because new cars were scarce and gas was rationed, you might have stopped at the corner of Center and Lake to pick up butter, cream, and milk. And by now that milk would cost you 62 cents a gallon, plus ration stamps. After window shopping at Schrader's furniture store, stopping at the bank to buy a war bond, you stopped in at the post office to send a letter to our boys overseas. Upon finishing your errands, you returned to your home, now valued at $4,600. As Women's Club brought to a close its sixth decade, Mrs. Fred Van Atta assumed the presidency. It was during the year 1951 that the practice of recognizing longtime members was made in the form of an afterglow. 3 names were added to honorary membership in the 1951 club year. With rationing behind them and a whole new future ahead, Women's Club could once again focus on local issues as opposed to national concerns. As the Women's Club entered its 60th year, the meetings started to take on a new flavor. Oftentimes, the public was invited to join in the club special meetings. During this time, the most popular programs were skits produced by the new members. These skits often brought comic relief to the program. The tradition had already begun of honoring past presidents at the opening luncheon. Many opening luncheons had already been held at Meadowbrook Country Club, and through the remaining years would continue to be held there. We had endured the war. The war effort had been an extension of other activities. During its first 60 years, Women's Club had shown Northville we weren't afraid to get our hands dirty, whether we were planting trees for Arbor Day, helping French war orphans, aiding the Northville Library and the Northville Schools Hot Lunch Program. The Women's Club participation in the community and beyond became a regular part of the mission of this organization. Americans relaxed and settled down with their families after World War II. Presidents Truman and Eisenhower led our country. Pan American World Airways began regular flights to Paris on Boeing 707s. NASA was established and the first U.S. satellite explorer was launched at Cape Canaveral. Teenagers got ice cream cones at Guernsey's on the corner of Katy and Center Street. Pat Boone crooned to such popular songs as Love Letters in the Sand and April Love. Elvis was inducted into the Army. The fashion statement of the day was to wear a chemise or a sack dress. Hairstyles were pin curls and ponytails. And your husband might have hopped into his new $2,000 Ford and headed to the barber shop to get that Princeton or crew cut. Modernization was the buzzword of the day. Today, who would have believed that in a town known for its architectural treasures, the classic turn-of-the-century Lapham home would be leveled, and in its place, the new, modern City Hall was built. With your yearly income of $5,000, you bought a three-bedroom home for $12,000. By this time, your milk was costing a hefty $1.02, and your bread continued to cost 19 cents a loaf. When the attendant filled your car up, it cost 30 cents a gallon for gas. Reading the Northville Record with your morning coffee cost you $2.50 a year. Yes, that's right, $2.50 a year. During the 50s, it was mandatory that one meeting occur outside of the community and one meeting be in the form of a tour. Visits were made into Detroit and to Greenfield Village. During this period, the organization sponsored a local Girl Scout troop, as well as making regular donations to local charities. Some of the more popular programs included Men's Night, where we got to take our husbands out to eat. Other memorable programs were those provided by members like What's My Line in '56 and Housewife Follies in '57. Presidents between '52 and '62 were Gertrude Van Atta, Ruth Mary Atchison, Elizabeth Chapman, Mary Yaney, and Alice Woodruff. The '60s proved hard times for the Northville Women's Club. As the club approached its 75th anniversary, it lost its longtime home, the library. The city closed the building and planned its demolition to make way for the new Northville Square Shopping Center. With the closing of their longtime meeting location, the membership faced a precarious future. Their meeting location was in limbo, just as changes in society began to show a decline in meeting attendance. During the 60s, the club established a rule requiring annual attendance at least 4 meetings per year, as well as requiring guests to attend 2 meetings before joining. President John F. Kennedy challenged Americans to ask not what your country can do for you, rather what you can do for your country. Congress passed a law to provide pay equality for women. The TV shows that entertained us were the Beverly Hillbillies and Hazel. Although I'm sure that you can agree by the looks of it, our club entertainment was equally as amusing as any sitcom of the 60s. Kodak introduced its Instamatic camera, and Polaroid introduced color film. Weight Watchers was founded by Jean Nidetch. While our children were glued to the television set watching the Beatles perform live on the Ed Sullivan Show, we merely had to attend one of our meetings to see A Really Big Shoe and Northville's answer to the Beatles. Saturday morning, no teenager would be caught outside. Rather, they danced around the TV set and watched American Bandstand. While songs like Hey Paula, Surf City, and It's My Party played, teens watched for the newest dance craze to use at the next Northville sock hop. The average 3-bedroom home would have cost you $15,000, and you would have spent the rest of your $6,300 yearly income on a $2,500 new Ford. You still used $1.04 for milk and 22 cents for bread. Women's Club treasurer Mrs. Carl Johnson spearheaded a drive to form the Northville Historical Society. The library was the first building moved to the newly created historic village. During 1963 to 65, the club had no regular meeting location. In 1966, the meetings were moved to the Presbyterian Hall at the First Presbyterian Church. The 70s brought Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Carter. Americans were glued to their televisions watching the Watergate hearings. Other memorable events during this decade were the Apollo missions, George Lucas's Star Wars trilogy, and the nuclear meltdown at 3 Mile Island. By the mid-70s, the old library building had been restored at the Millrace Village, and for the first time the club held a meeting there. Thereafter, regular meetings were held at Millrace Village once a year to continue the tradition of meeting in the old library. Many of the programs of this period were repeated in the 80s and 90s. Speakers included Eleanor Breitmeyer, Weldon Petts, Molly Abraham, and Steve Walters. Men's Night, which was restored after being dropped in the 60s, saw an attendance of 200 in 1974. Sit back and enjoy this video scrapbook of the 70s. How many of these women do you recognize? It's hard to think of the 80s as history already, but indeed they are. It was during these years that Northville developed the look it has today. The 90th anniversary of the Northville Womans Club was held at the Livonia West Holiday Inn in 1982. By this time, the Northville Womans Club had established a long tradition. Its format and practices had been narrowed and defined. The earlier charitable focus honed in more particularly to the local community. Scholarships were awarded on a yearly basis to deserving high school graduates. Now, once again, we open the video scrapbook to see ourselves in the 80s. To a close, attempts were made to return to the self-improvement tradition instilled by the original founders. It remains to be seen what will become in the next 100 years. It is clear that members, past and present, have a great deal to celebrate during this centennial year of the Northville Womans Club. "55 women have served the organization as president, with the 56th, Mary Louise Cutler, completing her service this year. The list of past presidents reflects the history of Northville, with names easily recognized by any who have researched the past of this community. The club was founded to foster self-improvement among its members. Through the years, that is what it has done. As the needs and desires of its membership and the society it supported changed, so did the focus of the organization. One thing that has not altered is the group's focus on this community and on its own proud heritage. In this, its 100th year, the organization is celebrating itself. Congratulations to the members past and present on the accomplishment of 100 years.
The Club Collect. Keep us, O Lord, from pettiness. Let us be large in thought, in word, in deed. Let us be done with fault-finding and leave off self-seeking. May we put away all pretense and meet each other face to face without self-pity and without prejudice. May we never be hasty in judgment and always generous. Teach us to put into action our better impulses, straightforward and unafraid. Let us take time for all things. Make us grow calm, serene, and gentle. Grant that we may realize it is the little things that create differences, that in the big things of life we are as one. And may we strive to touch and to know the great common woman's heart of us all. And, O God, let us not forget to be kind.